Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session, Collecting Standards for Scholarship Organization. Collecting Standards for Scholarship Organization, Industry, and Innovation. With me, I am Ibrahim Kalawal from Virginia Commonwealth University. And with me is Julia Gelfand from University of California, Irvine, and Jill Powell from Cornell University, and Anne Rao from Syracuse University. Today we're going to talk about standards, what they mean, different types of standards, the categories, and how you can obtain standards. First of all, I have these 4 definitions by different organizations, but they have the same thread, the same information running through each one of them. The first one by organization ASTM says a standard is the document that has been developed and established within the consensus process of the society. Mind you, that consensus word runs through all of the definitions. The second one by the European Committee for Standardization, CEN, states that a standard is a technical document designed to be used as a rule, guideline. It is a consensus-built, repeatable way of doing something. And then the British Standards Institute says that a standard is an agreed way of doing something. It could be about making a product, managing a process, delivering a service, or supplying materials. Standards can cover a huge range of activities, as you will see today. Activities undertaken by organizations and used by their customers. And the last one that I have is by the International Standard Organization, ISO, and it says a standard is a document that provides requirements, specifications, guidelines, or characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. Now, this is an example of a simple standard. Go ahead. The standard has a designation F2900-11, and it is a standard guide for characterization of hydrogels used in regenerative medicine. When you look at this standard, the fixed designation F2900 is the number immediately following the designation indicates that the year of original adoption, or in the case of revision, the year of last revision. A number in parentheses indicates the year of last reapproval, because sometimes some standards go out of date and they have to reapprove it, or they have to revise it. And when they reapprove it, if they revise it, they reapprove it and reissue it. A superscript epsilon indicates an editorial change since the last revision or reapproval. So you will see in this standard, you will see section 1 for scope, reference documents, terminology, significance, and use. So why are standards important?
So standards have, well, we might want to just step back a moment and think, why did we suggest this session was so important? We built on a session that we had last year, sort of introduced what standards were as a publishing outcome, but it also built on the fact that somebody told me recently that 1 out of 8 questions that posed to listservs for science librarians, all of us had or currently have in our profiles service as engineering librarians now or in the recent past, and that is a reflection of that intensity of the activity. But 1 out of 8 questions posed to science listservs, whether they be from the Engineering Libraries Association, through AFTE, or through PAM and the Special Libraries Association, or through the SDS list, are about some area having to do with standards. How to access them, what are they, how to interpret them, and things like that. So we thought that increasingly, as innovation is part of curriculum and an emphasis in academic frameworks, that standards play an increasing role. So why are they important? More importantly, they're identified as the definitions alluded to as a test method. And this is really important as you're trying to be innovative and you're trying to do something better, cheaper, with new materials. What is the protocol? What is the standard that you have to meet? And that's going to determine commercial viability, the adoption rates, and they have international significance because standards, depending on how they're issued, determine the jurisdictions that they hold merits for. So you're going to see trade associations, you're going to see government agencies, you're going to see lots of standards groups. And most importantly, we want to bring to your attention the role of NISO, the National Information Standards Organization. So if you sort of think back on the 9000 series, which were issued at the turn of the millennium, that was a big piece. And how is everybody going to cope with the 1999 turning to 2000? We hadn't done that for a long time. And technology was really affected that time. And so it didn't prove to be a big deal, but there were a lot of standards issued at that time. And then you'll see different, the ANSI, which is a US equivalent of domestic standards, and that serves as the representative to the International Standards Organization. So that's a big piece of really what's going on.
Now to types of standards. Standards come in categories. The first one I mentioned here is the one by the British Standards Institute. It could be national, that is by country. And then we have Japanese standards as well. They could be international, such as the ones by ISO, International Standards Organization. And they could be by function, such as the ones that make specification for making certain things. Now, there is a standard by function that specifies code of practice. Example is the standard practice for detailed clinical observations of test animals. That is an ASTM standard E2045-99. Another example is a standard specification for cross-linked polyethylene material gas pressure pipe and tubing, ASTM F2818. And there's another one that is used for test methods and analysis. Standard test method for rapid field test for trace lead in unleaded gasoline. That is ASTM D3348. Now, standards can be governmental, that is those issued by government agencies. And for instance, the one by National Institute of Standards that issue a standard for forensic testing, computer forensic testing. And then they could be for medical devices, such as the ones that is used for the disability side. And they could be industry specific, such as the one that is used for semiconductor products requirements for procurement and use. Finding aids. How do we find standards? We can find standards in different ways by using finding aids. WSSN, which is the World Standard Services Network, you can search that one to find standards just by using your keyword. And you can search TechStreet, which is also a database for standards. And you can also search IHS markets.
Okay, so standards come in lots of forms and have been indicated, but standards do change and time marches on. So one of the big things is versioning, editing, and the updates are critical. So when people ask for a standard, as part of that reference interview, we ask them what version they're interested in. If they don't know, we try to do a literature review to see how often it's been updated and when and by whom. And we want to know where it was, who's the issuant. And that's a real big issue because that determines the success in the match using a finding aid to identify that standard to obtain it. But most importantly, we really want to explore the revisioning process, and that's known as redlining. So it's sort of the editorial process, and that's what determines whether it's still in force or not. And redlining has a according to ANSI, they say the red line in redline standards refers to the use of red lines to cross out anything that was removed from the previous version. So if you think of just using Microsoft Word editing or whatever, and you underscore or you red out, or you're using the revision tracking, you would be practicing that yourself. So along with adding these red lines, in standards, the red line versions clearly mark any additions by highlighting the text in green. So we have the red and the green line. So you basically want to make sure that you're giving the user, at this, unless they're doing historical research, you're giving them the accurate standard that can move them forward at this point in time. So any heading numbers that have been modified or highlighted in yellow in the table of contents to suggest that that kind of a standard, at least those issued by ANSI, practice that. And redlining is pretty common in all of it. So when we subscribe to a database of standards, whether it be from ASTM, we get the notations in the column that suggest when it was revised and what the dates were. And that suggests the amount of redlining that you can expect. And it might just be one clause, or they've added something, or they merged something, or the vocabulary in the product or the service has changed names, or is known under something else. So for the commercial protection, this is really, really important.
Sorry. Oh, so a lot of this was already mentioned about the sources of standards from government agencies like military specifications, corporations, underwriters laboratory. You may see UL on a lamp is actually approved by the government to issue standards. OSHA actually has authorized them to do that. A lot of engineering societies issue standards. You probably recognize these acronyms. And I wanted to go to the next slide. I love this slide with all the pretty pictures and the branding. And I was thinking about two stories that really illustrate the importance of standards. In the 1800s, you may know this, in the railroad tracks, the track gauges were different parts of the country, like the north and the south. Some of them had, different sizes so that the train cars couldn't easily go from one set to another. So they got together and decided to establish a set regulation or policy or standard on the right gauge, which is 4 feet and 8.5 inches. And another problem was fire hydrants, that the coupling from the fire trucks to the actual fire hydrants wouldn't fit. And there were some terrible fires in Boston and Maryland where actually thousands of buildings were burned to the ground, not just the lives lost, which is in itself horrible, but basically the whole town just went up in smoke. And that prompted people to say, gee, we really need to have a standard here so that we're all using the same size fire hydrant and coupling and hoses. And I think I read that even San Francisco still has not participated in that, so I guess it's not a mandatory standard at this point. There is a difference between mandatory and voluntary standards, and I don't know if we have a slide on that, but that's something that we might talk about as we go on.
So as Julia mentioned before, all four of us have recent experience in supporting engineering education programs, which is how we've all gained so much experience in finding and acquiring and teaching about standards, particularly in engineering, because they're expected, students in engineering programs are expected by ABET, which is the accrediting body for engineering programs, to use standards. So it's really expected to be part of their curriculum. It frequently takes place in the senior design classes. They're actually working on a real world problem where they're expected to use real world constraints such as standards to solve the problem and be prepared for their careers after graduation. Lots of the use of standards we've discussed in our libraries, and we have some other colleagues who've been presenting on this through a series of webinars and email discussions on how we're expanding the use of standards into other curriculum as well beyond just engineering. So some examples that we were able to discuss within just the four of us are how we've supported students in information management programs, audio engineering and preservation, which might be the music school, medical schools, and even students in library schools to find and use and properly understand how to get standard, how to use standards. As the librarians who typically support the standards collections on our campus, we've also had a lot of opportunity to build relationships with other units on our campus beyond just sort of these engineering seniors or the PIs and research labs. This was just a list of things that we were able to brainstorm of other places and other units on campus in which use our standards. So innovation centers at Syracuse University, we have an entrepreneurship hub. We see quite a lot of requests from standards coming out of there. If your campus has a hospital, law and policy centers, particularly if you're looking at sort of tech transfer kind of things. If you have an office, which most of your universities probably do, on regulation and compliance issues, they may have questions about standards. Library school students, teaching them to do what we're doing here. My heaviest user of standards on our campus is our campus design and planning office. That includes our ergonomics office. They're frequently looking for standards. Accessibility offices or units on your campus, and even people at campus food service have to design kitchens and provide food to your campus within a certain set of standards.
So the IVR portal is incorporated by reference in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. The standards that are there are free to view. So if you have zero money to buy any standards, you can go to this site and actually view the full text, but you can't print them out because these are all copyrighted. And then the next line, ANSI, text-free to IHS, those are organization vendors where you can go and actually purchase the standards for your institutions. So the next thing we're going to do is all four of us purchase standards for our institutions differently. We have different ways that we do this, and so we're going to, each of us, go through here and show you how we do it.
So the University of California at Irvine is one of 10 campuses that compose the University of California system. And we have a consortium, and I see some of my colleagues here. And we, the consortium is California Digital Library, and we have 7 schools of engineering, which is sort of the steam behind the standards situation, even though that we serve the entire campus with some of those illustrations that was just shown. However, what we've done is think about where can we maximize our ability to share standards. And in the old days, we used to have the volumes from the ASTM, and they rotated around 3 campuses. So I got them at the smallest engineering school at that time. This was many years ago. They rotated. They started at UCLA, bought it, then it went to someplace else, and then finally came to Irvine, and then I sent it on to Riverside, which was building a, so over a course of 8 years, we were sending old and outdated standards, and then we were thinking, oh my God, this is really quite dangerous. So we brainstormed about what to do, and we came up with some consortium packages in the E-environment that we could get. And the biggest one that we have is through the ASTM, which is among the most comprehensive. And 7 campuses currently participate, I think, on what we have. And then in addition, my library buys additional standards, as do some of the other campuses from different sources that are needed and heavily used. So we get the ground vehicle standards from the Society of Automotive Engineers, and there's an option on the table now as we renew for our ASME journals and conference papers package and ebooks, whether we want to go forth with their new standards from ASME. Whether some campuses will choose to do that or not, at least it's an option, and we get them electronically. And then the user, we can point the user to do the search and to reconcile their information query and find their situation. So what I do, and I think most librarians do today, is we have a guideline. You can, a finding aid, which is a LibGuide on standards and specifications, and I identify what we have at Irvine and link to those, or if we have them in print, you know, what the call number ranges are, and explain that process. And then we also tell people what the options are for commercial liability. And we're going to talk about that later. But then, so then the campus, I buy them individually for a campus, for a user, and then we distribute them in PDF. However, the PDF has certain language.
Sorry.
So we have additionally, I spent under $2,000 the last couple of years in doing this, and I buy them from the source or through a vendor, and we try to get them as a PDF and circulate it to the user with the caveat that they can't share it. So for a research lab, they have to use it for the onus of the work of the lab, or for an individual researcher on their work is for them to use only. We do not add it to the collection, we don't process it, and we just have, it's a document supply. We just provide it. But when we buy them internationally, they can be $600 a piece, okay? And for long ones, or especially if they need multiple versions of the red lines and all that. So that's the most expensive one I've bought, but I've bought many recently in the $200-300 range. So that's the situation. We do it. We find it to be most cost effective to do the one-off situation. It's not sustainable if it was a lot more. We'd have to think about alternatives, but through our various brokers, we can do that. So that's how we manage it for life.
At Virginia Commonwealth University, we have let me see. Back. Up.
Did you change it today? I didn't get it. It's this one. Sorry, too late with your change.
When I came to Virginia Commonwealth University, the College of Engineering, at that time it was School of Engineering, was in its infancy and they didn't have anything. I built the collection from scratch. And when it came, I said, what are we going to do with standards? Because it's a small school at that time, there was no money to devote to buying a large database of standards. But as time goes on, thanks to my friend here, George, who said, well, there are other schools in your state that is using my database. Why don't you join them? I can sell it for you for this price. I said, wow, yes. So I got that one, but it's not enough. They still wanted standards from ANSI, from ISO, from other sources. And so we developed a standards on demand program. And that standard on demand program is that you deposit a certain amount of money with the producer. And as you get your request, you purchase it, and the deposit account is charged, and then you get it electronically. If there is electronically, I get the electronic copy. I don't want print because that creates a problem. So with electronic copy, I just get it and send it to the requester. And usually these heavy users are capstone students. They're in their final year when they're doing their senior design project. They have a group, and I just send it to them, and they use it like that. If there is no electronic and we have to buy the print, then that is when we have to do some cataloging, and then we lend it to the person, and the person keeps it for some time and returns it, and then it can be kept in the library for some time. So we get invoice on a quarterly basis from our deposit account. We track the spending, and when the deposit account is depleted, we replenish it. That is how we deal with standards on my campus.
So at Cornell, we have two big packages where we have all access to all the standards. That would be ASTM and I believe. And then we have a LibGuide because it's complicated where you find these. So this is just a snippet from the LibGuide where you go the acronym first, and then you go see where the standard is located specific to Cornell. And the rest of them we order on demand because I've heard there's 95,000 standards out there. So I don't think anyone in the room here could afford to have a complete collection of all these standards. So the ordering process that we have is to order print standards. Now we used to order them PDF and give them that way, but I noticed they were watermarked, and at the bottom of the standard it had my name or my colleague's name who ordered the standard. I didn't think that was right. I didn't think I should ask an employee, order the standard and your name is emblazoned on the bottom of the standard for the rest of your life. So, you know, and people were checking these out. So I got this idea from Charlotte Erdman at Purdue, and I'm very grateful. She told me what to do, is to order the print copies from IHS usually, or ANSI, where we order these. And we pay FedEx, so we get them in 2 days. And then we catalog them, which maybe takes another 2 days. So the patron has to wait 4 days, which isn't terrible since they're not having to pay for the expensive standard. And we get them cataloged and they check them out. We also put them in reference so they don't go out into interlibrary loan. Because if you read the click-through agreement when you're buying these PDFs, a lot of times they say they're very restrictive and they don't allow interlibrary loan and other forms of sharing because it's a single use. A lot of these vendors, I think, are not selling these to us with libraries in mind. They're selling them as if it's to a corporation, one user at a time, and so it makes it hard for us.
Okay, and so finally, at Syracuse University, similar to my colleagues, we have a LibGuide, how to do them, and we have a set of packages such as the ASTM standards, IEEE standards, and ASHRAE standards. When we have faculty come to us to ask about how to incorporate standards into their curriculum, or just how to expose students to them, these are the ones we point them to because we already have them. And they also are our most requested, most used, and these are the ones that we found are the most compatible with our practices of academic buying. But like everybody else, we have an on-demand system, and we use a different model. So unlike Jill, I was not, when we got to Syracuse, and I realized we weren't really doing very much to have standards in our collection, and there was requests for them, I inquired about doing the print and cataloging, and was told that our cataloging unit did not have the capacity or the turnaround time to drop things and catalog them 4 days, in 4 days using that model. I was also had been at an institution where we used IHS in the past, was informed that at Syracuse we were not allowed to have deposit accounts, so that took that option off my plate. And so TechStreet has been the model that works for us to meet our institutional requirements. So if you're thinking about how to add standards, how to get your hands on them, we've all kind of run into interesting institutional rules dealing with money and the use of other people's times in how credit cards, all of those things. So because they don't really follow the typical academic journal book model, there's a lot more investigating of those kinds of things that needs to be done when looking at solutions for standards. So at Syracuse, we use TechStreet. This is also the platform where we have one of our packages that we keep every year. So ASHRAE standards, we already have them on the platform. So we have a standing license agreement with them, and then everything else is augmented from there. So when we have a request, the request comes to the engineering librarian. She passes it on to me, and we contact TechStreet to get a prorated quote for the remainder of our subscription of this larger package and just add it to our online account. At the end of the year, when it comes time to renew our ASHRAE standards, we wipe everything out of the account except for those ASHRAE standards. And going forward, we're also going to keep the ones that are related to accessibility issues because it's a huge topic on my campus right now. And so we'll renew those individual standards along with ASHRAE standards and sort of just start over with the requests. So we're not printing them out and handing them. They are available to multiple users, so more than one lab, more than one class. We're not cataloging them. We do add them to the LibGuide, so they're discoverable, but usually it's one group of people who all knows each other that's kind of looking for the same standard. So the link can be shared in accordance with our TechStreet agreement. They're paid for by the one-time engineering budget, and that is all I have on there. We've discovered that our most used standards in this format, as I mentioned, accessibility is a huge topic, so all of the ones related to accessibility are huge, are most used. And through TechStreet, you can also buy print standards, and so for the few times where there's been a standard issuer that has either a minimum order or just doesn't make them available, we are able to use the same subscription model to buy the print one. We don't add it to the catalog at that point, and actually the last time when we had to order a print catalog or print standard, it got lost in our library, not outside, in our library. So the acquisitions librarian and I spent a week emailing all of our colleagues to ask them to help us look for a book about cleaning out grease traps. So they were not very happy about having to do that. So that is our overview of our 4 different models of how we acquire standards in our 4 different institutions. And with that, we have a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Yes.
So Linda Hall Library in Kansas City, which is where I work, we have a lot of standards. Historically,
Linda Hall?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we do ILL with them because we have specific agreements with the engineering societies, and we can do that. So it is an option. We do make you pay for it though,
Right.
because we're not giving away free stuff.
That's great. That is always good to know of another option. So if anybody didn't hear that, and I think we're being recorded, so I'm going to repeat that as well. Our colleague from the Linda Hall Library mentioned that they have a large collection of standards that are available through interlibrary loan for a fee.
And the fee just covers what we pay the societies for the access. So we're not making money.
Okay. So one more option for adhering to all of your interesting university rules and getting your hands on standards. Yes, 1, 2. Deborah?
Deputy Assistant George Washington University. One of our instructional designers was working with faculty, and she reached out to ANSI, and they told her about a university outreach program that faculty can fill out a form and enroll and actually get free copies of standards from ISO and IEC.
That is true. And our experience is it has to be on letterhead, it has to be an academic, and it has to be course related. It can't be research related. So that's the
So
difference
can't
of the
start
academic.
Yes.
So for people who are doing innovation or laboratory science, that may not be, they can't sign off on that.
But for the
Course
capstone classes, for the undergraduates.
For instructional
where we are,
purposes.
exactly. So,
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a great suggestion. Joe, did you have questions?
Yeah, Joe Buckets, IEEE. Just wondering, at these 4 campuses, are you aware of course programs that enlighten engineering students on the standards process, how a standard is developed, you know, what's involved in that entire process, why they have to be amended, and things of that nature? Is that?
It's the thing about the curriculum.
Yes, so yes, I would say all of our campuses have a piece where standards are used, but his question about we actually discuss the development process of standards either in courses. And so I'm gonna turn to the three of you. Do either of you teach, when you're talking about how to find standards, also talk about how standards are developed when you're doing any information literacy? Or do you know if your faculty?
I don't recall doing that. However, I have worked with a student when I got ASTM online, and he said his whole master's thesis was based on the standard and all the redlining associated with it, so he was so thrilled that we had access. But no, there are so many things and so many, I think we have 60 or 70 technical databases that I can't show them all. So I usually, show like ASTM, or I show one standard thing, but I don't talk about how they're all developed and what we've talked about today.
But to your point, I think it is an important part of training, particularly people who are going to go into professional professions, other professional societies, and for lots of engineers in particular, it will be a part of their professional responsibilities as they go forward to keep up with the standards and be participants in the development process. But
It's a question we got as a standard development organization, not a pitch here, but we've actually, our standards group has come up with something called the Mars Colony game, which you get, anybody that subscribes has seen about it. But that's what it does, and we had to go through it as the people that are going to be asked questions about it. And it was an incredible experience because it's a game where there's representatives from the standards, the people that have to develop the standard, the representatives of industries that want their product to be included in the standard, often competitors. There's environmental folks that are representing environmental concerns, and the group has to come to a consensus or the standard's not approved. So it's just, we were asked, do we do anything to help students understand that that's a lengthy process, and that was our response to come up with something.
I think it's really fun. We, the University of California also has the IEEE standards as part of our certificate package, and we do that, and I think the competition, students do like it, and when in the spring quarter I do point them to it. But I have to say that I participate in the instructional literacy piece for our seniors in technical communication, and when we review all forms of engineering outputs and information products, they're least familiar with standards, and it's one of the most important when they go out in the field. And if they're going to study for the professional engineer's exam, there's a big component there about the role of standards and specifications and patent development and things like that. So it's really in their best interest to pay attention and to have opportunities to read and study standards, but I don't see it incorporated in very many classes, surprisingly.
The reason for that is that the faculty doesn't want to give up time, because to do that you need a lot of time for you to tell students how standards are developed and so on. You will need time, and apart from other things that we teach, to add that to it, you don't get that time from faculty to
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Brittany Jordan from Western Carolina University. So when you're purchasing the one-off standards that can go crazy in price, and let's say you had access maybe in print to an older version of that, how do you determine when it's critical to student success to make the purchase for the update? Obviously you need to do it for your capstone, but I'm thinking more for the maybe the ones earlier in the program. Or is there?
Do you all ever?
I mean, I don't know. For me, I don't buy anything that is old. Once there is a revision, I buy the revision, because you can be putting something that is dangerous in the hand of your clients if you buy the older ones, because you don't know what they have revised.
There's also liability issues.
Yeah, there will be liability. You don't want to be sued for something that you do.
I guess I'm thinking more of like the class project that's not going to be
Even class projects.
Yeah, even in our, the same thing, in our institution we do, unless there's a specific need for the old one, so law school students sometimes are specifically looking for the old one, we assume they're looking for the new one, and the new one is the one we're going to provide.
I would say that I've had someone send me a list of 5 standards before and say, I want these, and then I write back and say, this is what they all cost, because they didn't know how much they cost.
Yeah.
And I say, can you please prioritize them? Because it's probably, I'm not gonna buy all 5 standards for one person, it will just blow my budget. And it also depends what time of the year, as we get to the end of the year, we run low on funds too, so.
And I've also gone, in those sort of instances where you get a list of 5 or 6, those for me typically come from like the law student groups, and through a little bit of conversation, finding out from them, actually just knowing about the standard and knowing sort of the abstract of the standard is really all they need, because they're putting together like an annotated bibliography, not because they're doing design work. So sometimes it just takes a little bit more of a reference transaction to really get at what you need, but I think we sort of all work under the presumption that you need the most important standard. Well, we are out of time. It is 4:20, so we thank you all so much for coming. Our slides will be available, and we have a list of further reading if you're interested. And I'm also going to add one additional slide with these couple suggestions that everybody just gave us about access and teaching tools for standards to this, so that'll be available on the conference website after today. So, thank you all.